Okay, so we're ready to go live, and we are live. So welcome everybody. We just started here today, and I'm meeting someone who needs no introduction, at least not to people who follow me. And the reason I say that is because the number of times that I have received suggestions that I should speak with Cyrus Janssen is uncountable. It literally happens every single day. Someone says, you should get together with Cyrus Janssen. So here we are, finally getting together. But today
Nice.
is just specifically about the Belt and Road. And we might get some general things going on.
Sure.
The Belt and Road Summit starts with an opening ceremony tomorrow where Xi Jinping is giving a speech, and I can't wait to see what he has to say. 130 countries are proving that China is not isolated by sending either their senior ministers or leaders, including Viktor Orbán from the EU, which I think is a bit of a poke in the eye for the EU. And of course, Vladimir Putin will be here for that.
Right.
So without further ado, welcome to my channel, which is, it's great to have someone so famous on my channel. I'm really stoked about finally getting face to face with you. Thank you for coming on and agreeing to be part of this.
Oh, my pleasure, Jerry. My pleasure. And I'm not famous. I'm just just a passionate YouTuber like yourself and someone that likes to talk about China. And I'm very honored to be here. So thanks for the invitation.
Well, believe me, you are famous. So question one.
Yeah.
First, let's get straight into this.
Sure.
You've lived extensively in both China and North America. I know that recently you spent a few years in Canada as well.
Correct.
So it's interesting to get your take. I've actually studied the differences psychologically or in terms of workplace psychology, at least between China and the West. And I have a very broad understanding. It's not deep, but it's quite broad understanding about the approach to doing business in China. But you've done it. I've been a teacher. I've been a researcher. I haven't actually done the business.
Right.
Can you give me a nutshell description of what are the differences between business in the US or business in North America and then business in China?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to cultural differences, and I think that is one of the things that we, it was really interesting when I took a class in university was called multi-international or international business relations was the topic of that. And so one of the things, for example, is when you're dealing with Chinese people, I think certainly in a business situation, it's very much that, and this really is very interesting, Jerry, because it actually complements China's foreign policy as well. Typically what you always hear from Chinese people is they always want to have a win-win cooperation. You'll hear this kind of win-win thing is very common. And that is obviously, something that, with the Belt and Road and our main topic is certainly we're going to be discussing a little bit more later on. But what's interesting is that, in doing business in China, it really comes down to the guanxi, which is the relationship, and really being able to understand, who you're dealing with and really form a type of relationship. And the interesting thing is, when you go to China and you're doing business, I think the very first part of that, you really need to understand your host. You need to understand who you're going to be doing business with. And I always say, for example, if you're there for 2 weeks business, probably the first week you're going to spend just getting to know each other and getting to understand each other. And then the second week, you actually get down to doing business and signing contracts or really understanding each other. If you're there for 2 days, well, then it'd be, the first day, more casual, the second day doing business. So, it's really more about having that relationship and building some trust. I think in the United States, at least I can talk about is it's a little bit more all about business. You might have, maybe you start for the first 5 or 10 minutes on some small talk, but then it's like, all right, should we get down to business? Yeah, let's do it. Okay, we're going to do A for B, and let's just get down to it. And so, it's a little bit more just, very direct, I would say, and China's a little bit more indirect. So that's a very big difference between Western culture and Chinese culture. And, a lot of it comes down to really understanding a little bit of that culture. And I think that's what is really important in order to really thrive long-term in China and really to be able to have some successful business deals is really understanding the local Chinese culture.
That would fit in nicely with what they call the long-term orientation dimension of culture as well, where Chinese people tend to think much longer term. They want to build those relationships. And American people think much shorter term. They're looking for an instant reward. American businesses will do a 3-month return for their business. and Chinese will be looking for much longer. They'll invest at the beginning, and they don't even count the capital expenditure in the accounting system of Chinese businesses. They don't count capital expenditure at the beginning. They just say, well, we've got to spend this much to get started. Let's write that off and then move on. Whereas Americans are they're writing it off over the first 5 years or 3 years, whatever the return on investment on that is. So there are some very, very fundamental differences.
Correct.
The world is seen as bipolar at the moment. I think it's you're either in the American or the Chinese camp. It used to be basically it was a unipolar world, but I think now we can say it's a bipolar world. Or very much getting towards that. You are seen as, I think, one of the very few neutral people online. You have a broad view of both countries, and both countries have their beneficiaries and both countries have their different successes. Why do you think more people can't see that?
Well, I think a lot of it, Jerry, is actually just the simple fact that most people in these Western societies, they haven't had a lot of chance to travel around the world, and they just simply lack the experience and they lack the nuance. And I'll talk specifically more about North America, as I've obviously grew up, born and raised in the United States. Previously I did live the last 5 years in Canada as well, so I've had a good taste of North America. And culturally, what's interesting here is that a lot of it just comes down to old stereotypes. For many Westerners, when they look at China, they look at it as China from 1950s or 60s. A lot of still people, I mean, it's incredible because I said the same thing, 15 years ago when I first went to China, that at that time, everybody was looking at China as if it's just everyone's wearing the Chairman Mao suits, riding around in bicycles. It's very far behind technologically. And even though that we've seen all of this transformation in China, the modern skyscrapers, the amazing technology, the 5 and 6G networks, and just how China is really dominating so many areas of tech, that doesn't really register with many Americans or North Americans or even any Westerners. And the main thing is that, it comes down to, in America specifically, we really talk about democracy, and we are really almost propagandized with that, in the sense that if you are a democracy, if you're a liberal democracy, you are a good guy, and if you don't have a democracy, you're part of the bad guy. And that's basically what it comes down to in a nutshell. I was born and raised in Florida, for example, and so we're 90 miles away from Cuba. And, growing up, I always heard, how evil Fidel Castro was and how terrible Cuba was and how, it's just a terrible place to go. And it was interesting when I went there in 2012, I had a very different, perception of that, where I've met, a lot of people were very friendly to Americans like myself. They were very proud of their country, and there were some interesting things as far as like the literacy rate was 100%, free medical health care, and again, it's just things that most Americans would never assume would even be happening there. Now, I'm not going to say that like Cuba is some amazing place and, that everything Fidel Castro's done is awesome. I've always tried to stay balanced, but my main thing with that is, unless you've really gone to a country and experienced it, then, what do you know? And so I think that's the issue, is that we have so many people inside the United States that have never spent a single day inside of China, yet they're going to lecture me on, what's China really like. And I've had that happen. I've had friends talk to me about, for example, let me tell you what's really happening in the Xinjiang province, Cyrus. I'm like, oh, great. Have you been there? No, I've never even been to China, but let me show you exactly what's happened there. I'm like, you've never been to China. Like you've never spent a single day. Like, no offense, I've lived in China for 10 years. I speak the language. Like I've got a bit more of experience than you, So yeah. I think once I think the interesting thing here, Jerry, is once you have people come over and see China for what it is and actually experience it firsthand, their perceptions are always instantly changed. It's never like what they perceive at all.
Is that your perception too? When you first arrived here 15, 20 years ago?
Yeah. I mean, when I first went in 2007, I think the nice thing with me is that I always have a very open mind, especially when traveling to a new country. I try not to come in with these preconceived notions on what it's going to be like. And I think for myself, I didn't really know anything about China. So I was just very much, I was a young man, just 23 years old when I went to China. And I said, you know what, I'm going to go with an open mind, really just try to, just see what it's like. I really don't have any expectations at all. I don't really know enough about China. I don't know anything about China. And yet I signed a 2-year work contract to go work in China. And I said, you know what, I'm 23, I'm single. I'm going to give it a go. I'm going to try and see what China's really like. And you know what, if it doesn't work out for me and I don't like it, I'll just come back. I'll just come home, and I've always obviously can repatriate back home. But, I think it was just that ability of having an open mind that certainly helped me as an expat as well to be very flexible. And that is, I think, a key for success as an expat is certainly being able to have an open mind and just take each day by day and just see what China's really like for yourself.
Yeah. And going back to your Xinjiang comment, I got tapped on the shoulder in a bar here in Zhongshan, where I live. Yeah. And it was an American who's been here longer than I have, also speaks the language, very, very familiar with the country, traveled a lot. But he tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, Jerry, you're on the wrong side of history with Xinjiang." And I said, "Really? And what happened to you when you were there?" And he said, "I haven't been there." Well, I've just come back from this. This was a couple of years ago, and I'd literally just cycled back from Xinjiang, and I'd spent 3 or 4 weeks inside of Xinjiang on a bicycle going through country regions. And you can't get from Urumqi or Wulumuchi to the border without going through many, many villages and seeing people in their natural environment. So when I put that to him, what experience did you have that's so different from mine? He said, "Well, I've never been there. I'm not going to go there because it's dangerous." Right. Oh, okay, right. Now we get the understanding that it's really a perception rather than a reality.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's a big problem for many people.
I also have a similar story to you. When I arrived, I actually paid excess luggage when I left Sydney. I came here from Australia, and I bought 2 shampoos, 2 body washers, a couple of things that I thought I'll never be able to get these in China. Right. And the first apartment I had was above a supermarket, which had shelves full of Procter & Gamble. It was just amazing insight to me to suddenly realize, oh, this is different to my expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay. So you and I are constantly online attempting to explain China. I mean, we do come from the same point of view, although we don't always have the same approach. We do have the same point of view, I think. Right. One of the points, I'm really interested in getting your take on this. China is collapsing. It's about to collapse. And this is not a full forum to discuss this. We can do this at another time. But China does have its problems. Yeah. As an outsider, which I know you're not technically an outsider, but you're outside of China now. I think you left before COVID, right?
I did. Yeah.
So 4 or 5 years outside of China. What do you see as China's problems from there? And do you see any actions to overcome them?
Well, I think it's interesting. I mean, one of the things that I always want people to understand first is how connected China is to our global economy. I think that's a really important thing to understand first off, because, for example, I hear a lot of people in the West that are almost cheering, that if China were to fail, this would be a great thing. It's time for the government to collapse. It's time for China to collapse. And the reality is that China is the largest trading partner for 120 countries around the world now. And, by the way, that's changed significantly in the past 20 years. You go back to the turn of the century, right around 2000, the United States by far was the biggest trading partner for the vast majority of the world. Within 2 decades, China overtook the United States on basically all fronts, almost on all continents, and now dominates world trade. So the reality is that the world, if China's economy does collapse, let's just say in theory it does collapse and it goes into total chaos, that is going to have ripple effects throughout the entire globe, including the United States. There are many key minerals and many key resources that we exclusively source from China. And so it's very, very interesting to understand a little bit more about how our global economy works. And I think that's something that's very often missed, is actually many people don't realize that, hey, China collapsing would not be a good thing. It actually would have this ripple effect throughout the world. But I think there's a lot of things that are a little bit overblown. And let's just come out and say, what really is happening and what are some of the big issues. I mean, we know that, for example, real estate is about 25% of China's GDP. And, I was in China during a period of rapid real estate growth, a period of time where, for example, I even had participated in this by, buying a property at a low price, holding it for a number of years, and then selling it for a very large profit. I bought in 2009, sold in 2016. So it was a very good timing in that regard. You certainly wouldn't want to be holding on for an investment or a speculation at this point, because, but that's basically what happened. And the interesting thing is, I draw a parallel to this because I think we always forget there was something that happened very similar to that in 2008 and 2009. That was, of course, the entire financial or the real estate meltdown in the United States that basically
the rest
caused,
of the world.
But I mean, it started with Lehman Brothers and Fannie Mae and Fannie Mac here in the United States with all of the subprime mortgage crisis. And it was nuts here in the United States. I mean, back in 2008, 2009. I mean, I remember my father's a contractor who remodels houses. And I remember one day he came home and he told me, he's like, yeah, I met this hairdresser that has 6 houses here in Florida. She's paid zero money down on any of them. And he's like, this is going to collapse. Like, this is ridiculous. Like, how can you have 6 houses? You're a hairdresser. Like, you don't have a large income at all, but yet she's just borrowing all this money. And of course, everything just went pear-shaped. Everything collapsed. So I think that China is definitely experiencing some problems with the real estate. I think this period of high growth in real estate is certainly contracting. There's a big issue with the aging population. Over the next few decades, you're going to see the number of workers in China is going to be reduced. The number of elderly is going to be increasing. There's going to be a huge need for China in the medical industry. They're still, far behind in many ways of having enough adequate hospitals and enough machines and enough to really deal and cope with the large amounts of people that will be aging. So, the interesting thing though here, Jerry, is that I don't think that it's not a problem that they can't overcome, because it's something that all of our countries around the world are really grappling with. I mean, I'm here in the United States, and we have a plethora of issues that is plaguing our country. And I mean, there are a ton of Americans that are extremely hurting right now, just financially, and just being unable to get out of that lower income cycle. Canada right now has become so expensive that it's just mind-blowing how much inflation has risen the cost of living there, where, I mean, if you're not making 6 figures in Canada, I mean, you're having a difficult time living. I mean, it's really, 6 figures is not a big salary in Canada anymore. I mean, it's nowhere close to that. So it's these things where, I mean, I think all of us are collectively struggling around the world, and so again, I think that's where we have to really realize that, again, we live in this global economy. And I think that, this is what we've been essentially building up for the past 50 years is, building a global economy where we're more reliant on each other. And it's a better thing when we can, trade and do business with other countries around the world. And that's what we really need to be focusing on right now. And that's why, again, going to our topic, is why Belt and Road Initiative has been such a massive policy for China and such a huge investment and really vision for China over the past 10 years.
Good points. Just on the aging population thing, I saw a report. It just came out after last year's 2 sessions, which said that China has invested 1 trillion RMB, that's 150 billion US dollars thereabouts, on aged care. But incorporated in that aged care, so they're building aged care facilities, which is something China never did, because culturally, Chinese people didn't put their old people into homes. It was bad for the family face would be lost if they did. But now that's changing. They're trying to change that. And the other aspect of that investment was that they're opening vocational training schools to teach young people how to care for older people in those facilities. So I would say that's killing 2 birds with 1 stone to a certain extent. The youth unemployment situation and the aging population are being addressed to the tune of 1 trillion RMB, 150 billion, albeit that in China, that's not a large amount yet. Right. It's a start. That's what they did last year. So I think that's an ongoing thing. So 2 of their problems. I'm with you on the real estate thing. We're in the process of buying another apartment. We're selling 1 and buying another. We actually own 2. And like you, I made a lot of money, but now when I come to sell the apartment that I made money on, I've lost it. It went up, now it's gone down. But by the same token, I'm buying another one at the depressed price. So I'm not losing, really. If you're already in the market, it's not an issue. If you're looking to get in the market, it's not an issue. If you're in the market looking to get out of it as an investor, then yes, this is a huge problem.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get back to the Belt and Road.
Yeah.
How do you think Belt and Road compares with other international strategies? I mean, I'm obviously thinking of G7's B3W, Build Back a Better World. How
Yeah.
does it compare?
Well, I think it's very simple. One of them exists, and one of them is a pipe dream. That's that's
Good answer.
the very blunt answer there. I mean, this is the interesting thing that that I really want to analyze from an American perspective, and where I really have some issues with the U.S. government is that what we always seem to be is we're very reactive. We're never proactive, and the issue with this is that China has made some great accomplishments over the past 10 years through the Belt and Road Initiative. What's amazing is that Western media constantly tells us that the Belt and Road Initiative has failed, that it never worked. It was Xi Jinping's master plan. 10 years later, huge failure. Like we just constantly get bombarded with this. But the reality is that the trade and commerce has already been happening for 10 years. It's not like they're building something and we're going to launch it today. It's not like, hey, we're getting ready for the 10-year anniversary. Now we're going to launch it and actually start. No, it's been ongoing. This is for example, it's economic deals. It's, hey, we're going to build you this bridge. In exchange, we're going to hopefully do more commerce and trade with you. Well, that's instantly, right? So, I mean, this has been, there's already been almost $10 trillion worth of trade conducted through the Belt and Road Initiative. So, I mean, this is already huge amounts of money that have already been facilitated through this. Now, the interesting thing is that while China was growing and more countries were joining the Belt and Road Initiative, this is where, again, you have the United States and our Western allies basically saying to each other, well, we need to do something to kind of counter China. Why don't we come up with our own, version of the Belt and Road Initiative? We'll call it the Build Back Better, the B3. And so again, it's not like the United States actually wanted to, come up with this program. They wanted to benefit the subordinate countries. That they wanted to do is actually come up with a program to counter China, and that's exactly exactly what we see. I'll give you another great example. In your home country, when Australia, I remember Scott Morrison, for example, he was very angry when the Solomon Islands had forged a relationship with China. He had a military deal with China, and all of a sudden, this is what was really interesting is, basically the Solomon Islands, China has a very close relationship with them. They've built an embassy there. They've sent an ambassador there. They have done trade. They're backing them up militarily. So China has the presence there. And the United States, for example, we don't maintain an embassy there, right? It's too small of a nation for us to maintain an embassy. We have no
just
interest.
started one. You reopened one as a result of this.
Yes, and so that's what I was getting to is
sorry.
that but for years we never had an interest to do that, but now all of a sudden it's like, oh wait, by the way, we're going to go ahead and do this, but it's to counter China. The reason for that is it has really nothing to do with the Solomon Islands, nor do we really care. We're going to stick some American diplomat over there and say, like, look, you need to be here for the sole reason that we're trying to battle China right now. So just go down there, do your thing. We'll send you on a 2-year assignment. After 2 years, you can get transferred somewhere else. We'll send somebody else in there. Just go serve your country and go do your thing. We need you there. We basically need somebody on the ground so that we can, try to get some leverage. And that's what you constantly see from the U.S. is that it's always reactionary. It's always, well, China's doing this. Let's go ahead and do that. And I think that's where we really see, and we're getting kind of in the core details of this, Jerry, as the Belt and Road Initiative, is we're seeing the difference between America's approach to, let's say, a continent like Africa and China's approach. And one of the quotes that I used in my videos was, the United States always looks at Africa as a problem to be solved, while China looks at Africa as an opportunity. And this is the very fundamental difference. And I've watched a lot of interviews from African leaders. They're very unhappy with how the United States treats them. Typically, for example, every year we host this, United States, the Summit of Africa leaders, where we'll invite all 54 leaders from all 54, African countries. And what happens is, and this is what the African diplomats say, we're all go to Washington, D.C., we all have to stay we all stay in a nice hotel, we all get a nice meal, but then we got to go listen to the United States say, look, Africa, this is what you need. And they address us as Africa. They don't actually address us as 54 individual countries with 54 individual needs and 54 individual wants and 54 individual goals. And that's kind of the difference. And again, it goes back to, where we opened the show with, as far as how did the Chinese do business with? Well, one of the simple things that the Chinese did was just simply go to all 54 countries and just simply say, well, what do you need? Right? Because if you're Mozambique, maybe you need a bridge. Well, guess what? If you're Kenya, maybe you need a railway. And then if you are, Egypt, well, then maybe you need better, a government building, which I think China's building as well. So, it's like, what does everybody need? And so it's just these little details that have really, given China the upper hand in doing these, and basically having a great success. I do believe it's around 50 or 51 of the 54 countries in Africa have, in fact, joined the Belt and Road Initiative. And China's had a massive presence in Africa over the past 2 decades.
Yeah, Jason Smith in Beijing, he's a friend of mine. I've actually met him, know him personally. He's posting some interesting things on Twitter on a daily basis. He's saying, China gifted this to this country, China gifted this to this country. And it really is. It's quite impressive when you see, if you go to Jason, I think it's Jason the Smith on Twitter. He's the guy who's actually pointing this out on individual bases. You can say that China wants to gift this to this country, and then people will be critical and say, well, just China's trying to buy friends. Well, yeah, there's nothing wrong with buying friends. It's better than trying to kill friends, I guess. That's the only thing I would say about that. Is the criticisms are not valid criticisms. If China is trying to buy friends, what is it doing to keep that friendship after they've bought that friend? If you can't buy loyalty, you can buy a connection. You can't buy the loyalty that goes with that connection and that relationship. And I think that's the difference with China. They are buying and developing from that. If they need a train line and this is what China will do, they'll say, yeah, we'll put a train line there because 100 kilometers inland, there's an iron ore deposit that we want. Right. So they'll put the train line in there, which will benefit everybody. And then the country gets to trade the iron ore with China, and China gets benefit of that, win-win for everybody.
Absolutely.
That's the way I see that.
Yeah, and I agree with that, Jerry. And the other thing is there's nothing wrong with that, and I think China is very good at saying, we'll do this for that. That's how they come in. We're not going to, and it's interesting because, for example, in America, we are the most capitalistic country. We're all about capitalism. We're all about entrepreneurship. We're all about, this is the American dream, if you will. Come here, start a business, become a millionaire, like work hard, hustle. This is kind of this, all these things that we preach. So it's very similar where, China sees an opportunity. Hey, you've got iron ore in here. Okay. We want that iron. We're not going to lie about it. It's not like we're trying to deceive you. We're very clear. Like, we need iron ore. We're also developed. We need a ton of iron in China. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to build a railroad. We're going to help facilitate this iron ore. We're going to build you a facility there. You're going to trade it with us. And, you guys are going to make money on that. You're going to provide local jobs. We're going to have a railroad that's going to help people get around and, export it back to China. It's a win-win. And and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, if it was an American company doing that, for gosh sakes, look at our history over the years all around the world. We've done the same thing. I remember when I went to Chile, for example, it was American companies that laid down all of the telephone infrastructure. So at one point in the 1960s and in the 50s and 60s in Chile, all of the telecommunications in that entire country, was all going back to American shareholders. We had built the entire infrastructure and we owned everything. And, that was, and so
it's really interesting that America could have gone down a different path. And I think Vietnam War changed everything, maybe the assassination of Kennedy, because if we look back at the Americas of the 1950s, early 60s, it was absolutely a wonderful place, growing fantastically. Everybody's driving big cars and gasoline was cheap and everybody had a nice home with a washing machine, a dishwasher. The rest of the world didn't have that. I grew up, I was born in 58. I grew up in the 60s in the UK, basically in austerity, looking at America and going, wow, wouldn't it be great to be like that? Right. And now I look at it and say, wow, it's not so great to be like that anymore. So it could have gone a different direction. It just needed a different focus. I think anyway, it seemed to all fall apart. Next thing, are you familiar with the white paper that got issued a couple of days ago about the Belt and Road?
I am familiar with it.
Okay. I didn't want to hit you with a specific question on this. There's one line in it I'd like to read to you.
Sure.
It says, economic economic globalization. So far, we're talking historically, economic globalization has not contributed to the common development that delivers benefits to all. Instead, it has widened the wealth gap between rich and poor, between developed and developing countries. What would you say about that? Basically, I'm thinking of 400 years of colonialization, starting with slavery from Africa, starting with exploitation from Africa. And then, we're seeing Africa is a very rich resource continent, many, many rich resource countries, but full of impoverished peoples. That's the way I view that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that specific statement is all about colonialism, right? Isn't it? I mean, it's really talking about how, for example, Britain and France had these massive empires. They had huge, empires, throughout Africa, for example. The United States, obviously, we were involved in the slave trade as well, and in getting these slaves over. But it's always a thing of exploiting, and I think that's a thing that is very common with that, and that's why you've seen. Even recently, like protests against, I think it's in the country of Niger, that there was protests against the French that were even there. Just this is like a month or two ago, in dealing with I think it was uranium that they were sourcing and things like that. So I mean, I think the simple reality is that when we had the British Empire and the French Empire, and you had all of these territories, I mean, it was all about getting the resources from these areas and not helping the local people develop. Why would you? They're part of your empire. You're going to just basically get the resources you want and feed it back to the motherland, which was back, obviously the UK and France. And this is an interesting thing because, this is the difference between what China has done is, and I'm going to read you an interesting, thing that I heard from this forum. This is actually the Saudi finance minister from Saudi Arabia. He said, this is a quote from him. Maybe it's time to set the record straight. China stepped up when people actually shied away from Africa. China built infrastructure that they cannot carry with them to China. It will actually be in Africa. China took the risks when people didn't want to take the risks. Instead of actually poking China, I think we should establish here that they did what they needed to do for their own interest, but also to actually help other nations. Instead of just antagonizing them and actually damaging the low-income countries which need their help, we should just show China as much love as we can for the sake of the low-income countries which need to find solutions for their debt. So, quite a powerful statement there from the Saudi minister there. But, a big takeaway that I hear with that is exactly like China's building the infrastructure in Africa. They're not taking that with them. That's a tangible benefit that you can actually physically touch and receive and actually benefit on a daily basis. I remember reading some insights into South America, and one of the insights that somebody had shared was when the United States comes to Latin America, typically we get United States military bases. That's what they bring here. They bring U.S. military bases here, whereas China comes and they build infrastructure. And that is, again, it's something tangible, right? What does a United States military base do for your country? It does nothing. It benefits nobody except the U.S. government and the military industrial complex. But when you're building a road, and I think what's important is I'm not trying to sugarcoat anything. I mean, there are some countries, for example, I know Kenya has built an incredible railway, and they have a very high debt as a result of that. But it's like, what other option do you have right now? Because right now, it's like, how are we going to develop our country? We need to have the infrastructure there. We need to have better roads, better, railways, better ports, better airports, in order for us to be part of this global economy and actually connect and start doing the business and trading with China and with other countries around the world as well. So I think that's really important to understand. I mean, and this would be something that you know firsthand living in China, is just look at the investment that China has done with the high-speed rails, right? Again, 20 years ago, there's barely any high-speed rails in China. Fast forward to today, there's over 40,000 kilometers of high-speed rails. But that's fundamentally shifted how every Chinese citizen lives their life, right? I mean, and the thing is China went into debt. I mean, it's not like it's been extremely profitable from day one, but it's something that, hey, this is the infrastructure that we're building for the next 50 to 100 years that are, and beyond, that is going to be the lifeline of every Chinese citizen, right? I mean, they want to get to the point where every village in China with at least 50,000 people are connected to the high-speed rail. So, I mean, 50,000 people is nothing in China, which would basically mean basically means the entire country is connected by high-speed rail. And, that would just fundamentally open up more opportunities for business, for commerce, for real estate, for everything. And so it's more, again, going back to what we talked about, this long-term planning with China and really seeing it into the future. Yeah, I mean, a few years after China built all these railways, sure, they're losing money. Absolutely they are. It's not going to be profitable from day one, but it's the same thing when you build, in the United States, we build a new football stadium, for, $2 billion. I mean, obviously you take on a lot of debt, and over time, you're going to pay that off and, hopefully be able to have a good ROI.
I made a video and wrote an article for an international magazine, actually got published internationally, which I was rather pleased with. Some of mine do, but not many. But I wrote this article which explained the poverty alleviation. Poverty alleviation is real, is what I called it. And it's actually one of my most popular videos on YouTube. It's just called Poverty Alleviation is Real, because I've seen it for myself. And one of the points that I make is, the World Bank looked at it and said, there is no question that this poverty alleviation is real. The question is it sustainable or is it cost effective? And the answer to that is yes, it's sustainable because China will sustain it. And it's not cost effective in return of capital investment, but it's cost effective in return of improvements in human life. And that's the different measurement that an economist from the United States and an economist from China would probably make. How will this improve human life? How will this get me a return on investment within X amount of months or years? That's the difference between our two ways of looking at business. Right. And it was very, very popular. In fact, I think it was in Pearls and Irritations, and he contacted me and said, your article is the most popular article of the week this week, which made me feel very happy. Awesome. I'm getting some people, a lot of people. The thing about Pearls and Irritations is the number of very important people who read it. It's an Australian informal private media group run by a former diplomat. And it's read by prime ministers and ex-prime ministers, and it's contributed to by prime ministers and ex-prime ministers. So it was nice to get into that.
Nice.
One other point you made about the Solomons. The Solomons Islands actually had a clause, and I've seen this. I've seen a photo of it. I don't know how accurate it is, but I've seen it. It actually precludes military from going to the Solomon Islands. The Solomons will not accept military aid. They will not accept a military presence. They have accepted a security relation with China so that Chinese police can go there and help them with training and things like that. But military is specifically excluded. And that was another thing that upset America, because they wanted to send, when they opened the new base, or the new embassy, they wanted to send a military base. And they said, no, we're not allowing China. Why would we allow you to do that? So that was another thing that kind of got left off the mainstream media.
Right.
Okay, let's move on. One of the things the white paper talked about, and this is a big thing that people forget about China, is people criticize China for its contribution to pollution, but don't realize the real story. China will be completely free of fossil fuels. It will be carbon neutral by 2035. Probably that's a terrifically difficult target to achieve. But if anything, they'll probably do it earlier. And then they will. That's their peak. Sorry, not carbon neutral. They will peak at 2035 and then go carbon neutral by 2060. Right. Much of the white paper talks about clean and green energy.
Right.
Do you think China's goals to lift global trade and the goals of reducing carbon-based pollution are mutually exclusive, or are they interlinked?
Well, I think it's definitely interlinked. I mean, I think it's definitely the future, right? I mean, we know that climate change is certainly real. I mean, it's definitely something that, we're all trying to be more mindful of. And I think what's interesting is that, many people don't realize is that, yes, China for many years was a very big polluter, but it also has changed significantly. I mean, I remember being in China in 2007 and 2008, where, we would have an app on our phones, that would actually count the, pollution. And that was like very early in, the smartphones. And, we were always monitoring, how bad was the pollution. And there were some terrible days. I mean, in Shanghai, where I was living, that was horrific pollution. And those are largely gone now. I mean, even in Beijing, I mean, it was, always, from 2007 to 2012. I mean, it was always very, very bad pollution days, and that's largely cleaned up now because of this, shift that China has made. Now, of course, coal is still being used in China. It's not like it's there yet, right? Obviously, you put out some timelines there. By 2035, it's going to peak, and then it's going to go down by carbon neutral by 2060. But I think this is what's interesting. I mean, I actually saw a great article in the New York Times that was actually very objective, is that it said that, the China controls the key technologies for the future of EV batteries. And basically this technology, it's impossible to produce without China right now. Like no other nation can produce these batteries in the most efficient manner and the best way as China can. So they're like, and whoever controls this key technology really controls a big part of the future. So of the world. And I thought, wow, that's pretty objective for the New York Times to say something like that about China. And it was really just how impossible it is for all of these smart cars, or these EV cars. Basically, it's impossible to produce an efficient EV car without China. I mean, that's just the bottom line. Like, you have to have China in the pipeline. But it's also, I mean, China's dominating on wind, on solar, on hydro. And I think it is providing a blueprint for other further developing countries around the world, and how they can adapt these green technologies and certainly live a better life. I mean, I remember the last time I was in Shanghai, which was just a few months ago, back in June. I was walking down on the Bund, and there's it was awesome. I mean, there's a seat there that has a little, just a public bench, and it has solar panels on there, and you could just plug your phone in and charge your phone right on the park bench, as you're walking down the very popular pedestrian street there in Shanghai, which I thought was pretty neat. It's just little things like that. I mean, China's really doing some pretty incredible things.
Yeah, we don't have them yet in Zhongshan, but we're a second tier city, but bordering on third tier. We're right at the bottom of the level. We became a second tier city about 3 years ago, and then immediately dropped back down to third tier in terms of GDP with COVID. So I wouldn't be surprised if we get redesignated as a third tier city soon. So we're on our way back. There's a lot of things happening, but that particular thing that you're talking about, I've seen them in Hangzhou, I've seen them in Beijing. They really are quite smart things. The other thing is communications here. Literally, I've been in the middle of the desert loading videos onto my WeChat, stuff that you just couldn't consider. I don't know what America's like, but in Australia, impossible. Once you leave a town or city in Australia, you're out of touch until you get into the next population center. It may be a small village, but you're out of touch.
Actually, it's abysmal how bad our cell phone coverage and our 5G is here in the United States as well. Even in a major city, it's just so spotty and just so sporadic. It's nothing like China. And I mean, when I went back in June, it was just so nice to have beautiful 5G that just works efficiently anywhere I was at, no matter where. I could be in an elevator, I could be going through tunnels, or the metro. Anywhere. It's working. I mean, it's far advanced, more than anything we have here in the United States. There's no doubt about that.
True. Yeah, it works in elevators because they have a China mobile. Most elevators have a China mobile sticker. It indicates that your phone will work there. It works in underground car parks everywhere. Yeah. Amazing. Yeah. So exactly. Let's move back to the Belt and Road, or a little bit aside from the Belt and Road. We're currently witnessing problems with trade between China and the USA that seems to be related to the view that the USA has that China is some kind of threat to them, or maybe a threat to Taiwan, even its own people. America keeps alleging that China's a threat to its own people. Hong Kong democracy, Tibet, which has been going on for 70 years, Xinjiang, which has been going on fairly recently. Do you think that this kind of environment of hostility is deliberate, or are they misinformed?
Well, I think, again, many people are very misinformed about China to begin with. I think that's definitely a true statement. And I think what's interesting is, for example, when you look at Tibet, I mean, Tibet 70 years ago was one of the poorest places in the world. I mean, it was absolutely desolate for the people that were living there. There was the serfism, which was, just kind of this caste system and how they treated the citizens there. And I mean, it was not a good time in Tibet. And you look at what China has done. Interesting enough, for example, in Xinjiang, there's more airports in the Xinjiang province than anywhere else in China. There's more, it's turned into one of the most popular tourism destinations. It's one of the fastest growing economic centers in China is in the Xinjiang region. And, same thing with Tibet. I mean, people today in Tibet are living much better lives than they ever have at any other point in their history. And it's because of China investing in the infrastructure, building the hospitals, the roads, the schools, and, really putting in a concentrated effort to welcome in all of these people and just make sure that everybody's included. I think that's the one thing that is very difficult, Jerry, for people to understand here. And the difference is that in the United States, we have 50 very unique states. But in the reality, you could go to all 50 of them. You and I, we speak English. We're going to be fine. The culture is pretty much the same. The United States is almost the same wherever you go. Yeah, there's some certain nuances and some certain differences, maybe even some certain words and phrases that are different. But on the whole, it's the same wherever you go, generally speaking. That's not the case in China, right? And I think what people fail to understand is there's over 300 different dialects. There's 56 ethnic minorities. There's an incredible diversity when it comes to China. So I always tell people, I say China is kind of like a continent in many ways. It's very different because when you're traveling throughout all of these different regions, they are completely different, as you know. I mean, Xinjiang is very different than northern China, which is very different than Shanghai and Sichuan and southern China. I mean, all of these areas are so vastly different. The language is different, the culture is different, the cuisine is different. So there's so many of these things that it's just such a fascinating country. I mean, you could spend a lifetime in China and it wouldn't be enough because there's just so many unique things. Yeah, absolutely. And it's exciting. I mean, I had 10 years in China. I traveled to over 50 cities, and there's so many cities I haven't been to, and there's so many things I didn't see. And I'm like, man, I've been all over China. Like I've done pretty well, obviously much more than 99.9% of any foreigner. And so, but yet I still feel like I haven't done even enough. Like it's not, I lost my camera here. Here, there we go. A little switcheroo.
Yeah.
My camera
Your voice was still there.
Yeah. So anyways, I think that is really the one thing that people don't understand. I mean, when it comes to Taiwan, I think I've made several videos about this myself, is the fact that in Taiwan, the reality is that Taiwan is a very interesting situation because the reality is that Taiwan has some amazing technology. And it's also the same technology that China needs to power. It's like, for example, we know all the world's most advanced microchips come from Taiwan. Well, China's depending on those on many of those microchips as well. TSMC, the largest microchip producer in the world, I mean, they're building factories in China. I mean, it's really kind of preposterous to me when people say, I mean, I'll give you an example of how bad the propaganda is here in the United States. My wife went to breakfast the other day with some moms from our children's school, and they said, I'm not kidding you, this is what their theory was, is they said, hey, do you think that this whole Israel Hamas thing, do you think China just started it as a distraction, that way they could just start bombing Taiwan? And my wife's like, oh my gosh, are you, like, wow, like, is that literally what you just said? Like, that's what you think's happening? And she's like, I don't know, like maybe they just started the whole Russia-Ukraine thing too. She's like, well, Russia-Ukraine's been going on for like 10 years. It's like, what do you mean 10 years? It's like, oh yeah, you don't know any of the history, right? It's not like it started, last February. I mean, this is a conflict that has been going on for a long time. But no, I mean, China did not start Israel and the Hamas war in an effort to distract America so they could start bombing Taiwan. My simple thing is, what does China get from bombing Taiwan? Like, we hear these things that China is going to start just bombing, this. I mean, and this is the problem. Like, we've had some like a former Pentagon official, Elbridge Colby. He's very active on Twitter. I called him out in a couple of videos because he said, here he goes. He says, Taiwan needs to wake up and realize that 1.4 billion people have a death wish for you. And I'm like, wow, you could not be more out of touch with reality. Like,
Mm.
like for example, like what, don't forget, Chinese people look at Taiwanese as their brothers and sisters. They're not wishing death upon them. That's
Mm.
preposterous for you to say that.
We saw that
Oh,
at the Asian Games.
yeah, I
Can't
mean
fake it.
it's ridiculous, but it's
Yeah.
also ridiculous to say, like, let's just say, for example, that China does in fact, okay, starting tomorrow they're going to bomb Taiwan. Well, what is the benefit? What does that gain China? China has everything to lose, nothing to gain. It doesn't do them any good at all to do that. So I really think the Taiwan threat is very overblown. It's certainly overblown in Western media. I mean, I've been to Taiwan probably half a dozen times, and I mean, it's amazing because you talk to people in Taiwan and it's like, yeah, we've been hearing this for 50 years, man. Like, what we're going to do? We're going to keep living our life and just do our thing. And, like, it's like, we enjoy our life here in Taiwan. Like, Taiwan's a great place. I love it there. Everyone, it's very relaxed. It's very chill. It's very much like China in the, kind of, it's not as developed as people think. It's very old school when you go to Taiwan. I remember I used to go there from Shanghai, and I would get in a taxi driver, and he's like, "Oh man, you live in Shanghai? Do you know how many Taiwanese people we have living there? Like, Shanghai's the best. It's so developed. It's so modern. Oh, I really wish we could be like China. Like, I wish we could have the infrastructure like China." I mean, this is what the Taiwanese, cab drivers were saying. And, to me, and I mean, it's, I think Taiwan enjoys, what they have. I mean, they have a special setup. They have a very special way of life. And, but I mean, at the end of the day, I think all of them want peace. I mean, we saw a recent poll that had come out, and I think, the vast majority of people saying, look, we want the status quo for right now. Again, like it's not like we have this perception in America that, okay, here you have the entire island of Taiwan. Everybody is screaming for independence. No, the vast majority of Taiwanese don't want independence. They do not want to declare independence from China. That's completely misleading. But, that's often what we try to portray here in the Western media.
Yeah. It's an interesting point that actually there was a survey done in Australia, and the number of people in Australia who believe that China is going to invade Taiwan is greater percentage-wise than the number of people in Taiwan who believe that China is going to invade Taiwan.
I saw that.
Only media can do that to you.
Only media. And what's amazing is it was something like 1 out of every 10 Australians believe that China is going to invade, while it was 1 out of every 20 Taiwanese. And I mean, that was the whole thing with, for example, the AUKUS deal, which I think, like, man, Australia got just suckered into that so bad. And it's just ridiculous. Like, you look at the deal. I mean, like, for example, like, let's invest $368 billion into buying nuclear power submarines to protect us from our number one trading partner. It's
really
like,
strange. Especially given that there's only 25, 26 million people there. You do a per capita on that. How does this number of people justify that amount of money being spent? It doesn't.
It's insane. It's insane. I mean, and the thing is, it's like, again, what does it benefit? I mean, I had somebody argue with me, and they're just like, well, I think that, China, they're very dependent on Australian iron ore. So there's a very high chance that China could go in and militarily invade just to get the iron ore. I'm like, why don't they just buy it? It's like, like they are, I think, I correct me if I'm wrong, but I think China buys around 80% of Australia's iron ore. 80% of the iron ore exports are going to China. So it's like, hey, if they want the last 20, I think they can just buy it. It's pretty simple. You're kind of 80% there. Hey, why don't we just take that last 20%? By the way, we'll pay you for it. We're not going to militarily invade you. And
it's inside of Australia. It's a little known fact that Australia-China trade relationship, China is their largest customer and their largest supplier, to the tune of 40%. It's 39 point something percent of all trade in Australia, international trade, is with China.
Right.
And that's pretty damning. They're currently trying to poke China in the eye. And really what they should be doing is saying, and Victoria, the state of Victoria, signed up for a Belt and Road Memorandum of Understanding with a view to building a few infrastructure things. And the federal government said, can't do that, and tore it up, and wrote laws to say that only the federal government can do this. So kind of really spoiled things. And China also manages the port of Darwin, which is a huge investment. They put $500 million investment in this port and now upgrading it. And there's 2,500 US Marines 3 kilometers down the road, and the nearest military threat from China is in Hainan Island, 7,000 kilometers away. Yet they're saying this is a threat that needs to be looked at. Well, it wasn't a threat when they put it in, but it is a threat now. So there's some odd things going on. And yes, someone's just pointed out Australia has a surplus. It's the only developed country in the world with a trade surplus with China.
Yeah.
Why would you spoil that?
Yeah, I mean, it's just and that's where I think is it just comes down to some rational thinking, Jerry. I mean, it's just like, when you try, but but this is the problem. I mean, we know that, people are just so misled from the media. I mean, and the propaganda that comes from everywhere. I mean, there's propaganda in every country, obviously China included, and there's propagandas around us. But I think what's really difficult for what I'm a little bit sad in right now is, for example, you look at, the latest, the Israel-Hamas war, and you look at how just divided Twitter has become. Twitter is just a absolute swamp full of just hatred and just a lot of nasty stuff. There's a lot of good insights as well. So you kind of have to sift through that in order to get some of the good insights. But, it's just sad because, so many people are just very opinionated. They only look at it one way. They believe that they know everything on the situation. And, in the case of that war, I mean, we've got innocent civilians on both lives being lost. And it's almost like we forget that, it's like, like innocent people are dying, and more will die in the next few weeks. Like, it's 100% going to happen.
And that's China's stance on this. Let's stop the slaughtering, stop the invasions, whatever you want to call it, stop it. And they get around the table and start talking. That's what China's trying to do.
I mean, and I think China's had a very good response with that. It's a very good response. And the problem is that the United States is in a very awkward position right now, because we are all about freedom, democracy, and human rights, and all of these things. And and certainly, so we have to stand by Israel. I mean, that's like we are their closest ally. So from the official United States government perspective, we're backing Israel 100%. But now all of a sudden, Israel is looking at going in a ground invasion in Gaza, and all of a sudden now you're looking at potentially one of the largest humanitarian crises and just a complete genocide of against the people, to be quite frankly. So I mean, can the U.S. just sit there and just let Israel do that and just cause total destruction in Gaza? Yeah. I mean, there's so many things that need to be answered, and that's a complicated situation that I know it's a little bit out of our context for today's video. But
it sure is. Let's go back to a final question, because we did say we'd keep this to an hour because it's very late where you are. I'm going to ask you a hypothetical here.
Sure.
If you were in charge of or had any influence in the direction of the Belt and Road, do you see any places where you might like to take it?
Yeah, I'd like to take it to the United States of America. I'd like to bring China's 5G network here, so I can actually receive some phone calls I literally have no cell phone reception in my front yard. Like I cannot be.
Front yard.
Yeah, okay. like I cannot at my house that I live. I cannot get accurate cell phone reception at all, which is just hilarious. So, I mean, I think what's interesting though is, what I think is really tough though, Jerry, like in a serious note, is, there was the New York subway system. I think they had come in and they wanted to upgrade their cars. Well, all of a sudden, there was a Chinese company that came in and they had these, amazing, subway cars that they were going to come in. But then all of a sudden somebody said, well, they're coming from China. We can't trust them for national security purposes. And it's like, really? Like, it's a subway car, like what is China going to do with this subway car? And we've just gone down this rabbit hole of condemning everything from China, and that everything is really bad from China. And so, I mean, I would absolutely be wanting to, on a serious note, I would love to see China. I mean, it will never happen. Obviously, China's not going to come in and do this, because that bridge, unfortunately, has been burned down, is the fact that, the public's perception of China is so negative right now. I mean, there's no way that anybody could come in and build anything. I mean, even look at like the TikTok app, everyone is freaking out about that because, it's from China. But I think, probably a more realistic one would be India. I think would be a great partner. Obviously, they're both members of the BRICS nation, the BRICS alliance. I think India
and their CEO.
Yeah, and that's right. And I just think with in that regards, I think it would be a really good, really good. And India is quite an interesting country, because they are really playing walking a very tight rope and actually trying to play the best of both worlds as well, right? They want to be close to the United States, they want to be close to China, and they try to, they have very much this policy of non-alignment is very much an Indian thing. So I think
not a bad policy though.
It's not. It's definitely not. And I think that's kind of where I'm seeing this whole world shifting to is, like we said, we call it a multipolar world, but I agree with your statement that it is a bipolar world because you're either in the China camp or the United States camp. But I remember, I'll close it on this one. I think the Barbados prime minister had one of the most brilliant analysis of this when BBC came and hammered her like, don't you think China's doing this and that? And she's like, I would hope that the BBC reporter has more respect for the prime minister of my country and let me govern and realize at the end of the day, we're a small nation. We're an island nation in the Caribbean. We want to have great relations with China. We want to have great relations with the United States. And basically anybody that's not one or two in the world, that's exactly where you want to be. Why wouldn't you want to have great relations with both the top two trading partners in the world?
The PM of the Solomons said exactly the same thing. He said, I am elected to represent my people. I've made a democratic decision with the support of my parliament, and the Americans are telling me that I'm wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
The BBC telling him that he's wrong, probably true.
Yeah.
So we've just hit the hour. We had 900, I think we tipped at 960 viewers, which for me is amazing. And I know that I'm piggybacking on Cyrus Janssen today. So we got to the end of the time limit that we set for ourselves. And is there anything briefly that you want to add? And I don't think we need to do the where can we find Cyrus Janssen because everybody who knows me knows you already.
Sure.
Anything else to add before we say goodnight?
No, I think that's great. So Jerry, I want to just say thank you so much. I've been following you on Twitter for a couple of years now, but it's a pleasure to finally connect with you over a chat. So and I do hope to meet you one day. I think you might know that I am a very passionate golfer as well, and Zhongshan is where the very first golf course in China was built. So
I'm aware of that. Yeah.
So it is kind of on my bucket list to go play.
I think Greg Norman had something to do with that too.
Yeah. So exactly. So I mean, it is one of my dreams to get back to Zhongshan and actually play those golf courses because it's just a historical thing. It would be quite fun for me to do that.
I look forward to meeting you in the 19th hole.
There we go. Sounds great.
Okay. Thanks very much. And good night. Have a good rest. And I'll see you next time we get together. Thanks very much for participating in the Belt and Road series with me.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you.
All right.
And thanks everybody else for